Governor Ron DeSantis signed a bill into law that makes it easier for someone to be sentenced to death in Florida. No surprises here. After the Parkland school shooter was given a life sentence because the jury was not unanimous in recommending death, the governor indicated he wanted a change. Since 2016, Florida law required jurors to be unanimous in a death recommendation. This new law only requires 8 of the 12 to do so. We are so happy to have the expertise of Gail Levine, a retired Miami-Dade prosecutor, as well as Craig Trocino, the director of the University of Miami Law's Innocence Clinic. So welcome back to both of you. It's like old times. When we were covering the sentence of the Parkland shooter, both of you were here for analysis. This new law, if it were on the books then, that means the shooter would have been sentenced to death, unless, of course, the judge didn't heed that recommendation. Gail, do you think this new law is a good idea?
I consider this law something that I would say instant gratification for death penalty proponents. It sounds good to start with. It sounds like it's going to move the cases along, but I think in the end, it's a bad idea.
A bad idea. Why, Craig? I know a lot of defense attorneys have said there should be a high threshold for a death recommendation because we're talking life or death.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I agree with Gail. This is a solution in search of a problem. Before, while we were still having unanimous verdicts, we led the nation in death sentences. And the clear national standard is unanimity. This seems to be a reaction to the Parkland case. Because the common refrain from supporters is that the Parkland shooter, quote, escaped justice, unquote, although he was convicted and sentenced, and he's going to die in prison. So I don't know that any of this process that we're going through is anything about justice. It's more
but
likely
Gail,
about vengeance.
Why have a death penalty? So many of these parents, so many people who watched this sentencing with us said, well, if there's ever a case for death, it was this, and you had jurors who just couldn't agree. So why even have the death penalty?
Well, I think the death penalty provides a lot of closure. Having witnessed an execution myself of Thomas Knight, I found that the family got so much closure from that and that it was the right decision in that case. What I think is the problem is that jurors aren't honest with themselves. When the prosecutors spend days, and jury selection takes days, sometimes weeks, and they ask the jurors, can you do it in the right case? They really lie to themselves. And when push comes to shove, they can't do it for religious reasons or for whatever reason. But I think that's the problem. The problem that we're trying to overcome is basically a one-person veto. Now, if you have that in the innocence phase, in the first phase of the trial, if one person says not guilty, it's a do-over, right? The person doesn't go free. We try the case again. In this circumstance, if one person says, no, I don't agree, the person gets the opposite sentence. So the problem is trying to figure out through economics, what's the best way to reach some unanimity or some majority that allows the court to see that the person that was going to be sentenced to death should be sentenced to death.
Right. In the Parkland case, there were some jurors who complained that those who didn't want death also didn't want discussion. Their mind was already made up. Craig, was
Correct.
that just right? Craig, what do you think about that? Was that just bad jury selection?
No, I don't think so at all. I think Gail makes an interesting point that the jurors, when they have to make that decision, that deliberative process is very intense, very weighty, and very heavy when you're finally faced with having another human being's life in your hand. And I think jurors take that very, very seriously, as they should. And the Parkland jury apparently took it very, very seriously. That doesn't mean that no death sentences were meted out in the last 5 years in Florida, because they certainly have. Another death sentence was issued in Broward County Courthouse that same week. So this is not a problem with the death sentencing process. It's an issue that it's difficult to get a death penalty, and it ought to be.
Florida right now, under this new law, would be, what, 8-4. The other state that requires a majority is what, Alabama, and that is that a 9-5 or is that an 8-10?
That's a 10-2, and it's Alabama, Indiana, Missouri, all three of them. And I think they account for that one-person veto. I thought that the 10-2 was probably going to be able to be swallowed a little bit more by the United States Supreme Court, who has moved to a lot of unanimity in decisions about criminal cases, not necessarily in sentencing. Obviously, we've had 2 executions where people have not had a unanimous decision in the last couple of months. So I don't think that the court is looking completely for unanimity, but I think 8-4 is a somewhat low standard, and it causes more divisiveness as opposed to more people coming together and believing that the penalty is appropriate.
This is probably not going to be without legal challenges, right, Craig? I mean, it was Hearst, I guess, that sort of undid the majority rule last time around. What do you guys expect this time around, Craig?
Oh, I anticipate a flood of litigation stemming from this that's going to cost the state of Florida millions and millions of dollars to defend this particular statute. I don't think the money is necessarily well spent, considering that there were executions carried out and that we've gotten death sentences post Hearst since 2017. Like I said earlier, we've led the nation in death sentences. So it wasn't for a lack of sentencing people to death. So I think, I'm
both
sorry,
of you, I was just going to say, both of you, thank you very, very much for your legal expertise, of course, during the sentencing of the Parkland school shooter, which meant so much to this community here in South Florida. And of course, we'll be in touch as this continues. Thank you.